Hey, my name is Deborah Winters. Welcome to my YouTube channel, a place where you will hear conversations with ordinary people telling their extraordinary stories. Hey guys, welcome to my YouTube channel, Their Stories. Hopefully you had a chance to listen to the first story from Rebecca. Rebecca is the executive director of A Woman's Choice here in Lakeland. And do we consider that a pregnancy crisis center?
Yes, some people would understand it that way. That's something people can relate to. It's not terminology we use any longer in the industry.
So what terminology do you use?
Some would call it a pregnancy resource center, but even that's a little outdated. We would call it a pregnancy help clinic because we want to emphasize that we are a medical clinic, and so we're reaching women with medical services.
So are you saying health or help?
Help.
HELP. So a pregnancy help center.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
Which I've been involved with A Woman's Choice for years. I don't know how many years.
Yeah.
It's just a wonderful organization.
Thank God.
And we just had to walk in her shoes. And I have brought friends in, and we got to experience what a pregnant young girl would experience on their arrival at the clinic.
You get to walk in their shoes.
In her shoes. So it's just a wonderful thing. So Rebecca Klein, thank you for being here. So we're going to pick up kind of where we left off last time, and you walked us through your childhood, and that was trauma.
Yeah.
So so let's pick up. You were a teenager, and we can pick up from that, maybe.
Yeah. Well, thank you for letting me share more of my story.
I'm so excited. And, yes.
My hope is just in telling the story that God gets glory from that, because
we're here to give hope.
Yeah, and that's it. That's the only reason nobody needs to know all my business. But I appreciate the opportunity to share, because the only thing it can point to is God and what He has done and what He does.
And that's the purpose of doing what we do.
Yeah, and I love what you do.
Yes.
So in the last video, I got to share what I would call my origin story. Each of us has that, and that's kind of just shapes who you are.
Right.
But like you said, there was a lot of trauma in that, and I don't know that I knew that at the time. I don't think you usually do. You just kind of adjust to what you have. Yeah. So as I come out of childhood, teenagehood, and into young adult years, when I'm going off to college, is the first time I begin feeling and recognizing that had an impact on me. Of course, there's things going on, but again, it's survival, really.
Yes.
And so you're not focusing on how's this affecting me as a person, but then you start living it. And so for me, that really began developing late in high school, like my last year of high school into college.
And you were
home.
You were at home in high school.
In high school,
yes.
So, but I left for college.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you must listen to the first part of her story, because there's so much that we can't cover here. Yeah. But had all that trauma, all that was going on in your home, I don't remember. Did that carry into your life as a teenager in high school? Were you still being exposed to all of that stuff?
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes. And all of it.
And you were like 16 and 17 years old, and you're still seeing all this stuff.
That carries
and living.
all the way into my young adulthood.
Wow.
And really until my father passed, which was in my early 30s. So it never really stopped. You just experience it differently, because I grew, but the circumstances didn't change. No.
And as a teenager, you're still accepting of behavior and what's happening in your environment.
Because we had no choice.
You had to survive. It was your survival.
Yes, I would say so.
Okay.
I would say so.
Okay.
So the first time I began, and again, not that I was conscious of these things, but I can relate them back and reflect on, seeing that impact. But truthfully, the first impact was in my late teens, my first boyfriend. And, every young girl wants a boyfriend, but it just, what happened, I ended up dating my very first boyfriend for about 5 years, and a nice guy and everything. That's not the point of the story.
5 years you were in,
all the way through college, through my senior year in through college. And I was a Christian, though. I had come to know Christ as a child, and I was committed to my faith and to serving the Lord. And in fact, as a teenager, I was a leader in my youth group and in church environments, because I was committed to my faith. That was my anchor. That's what I had.
Wow. And all this trauma that's going on here, and you were a leader.
Yeah, because it's interesting with trauma. I talk about this sometimes with my brother and sister. I mentioned them last time. It's so interesting to me when you talk to any of the people you talk to, when people go through the same environment but come out so differently, or respond so differently is a better word. And so if you look at my brother, sister, and I, same exact environment, yet each of us responded in very different ways. And so my sister took the rebellion route. I was the overachiever. So that's how I compensated for what was going on.
You were going to be a leader.
That's it. I was going to, do the best at everything and not cause any more grief. You know what I mean?
Were you a peacemaker?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Without a doubt.
Okay.
And so, so I was a committed young girl to my Christian faith, and yet I started dating this young man who I knew through church. So one would hope that would be all okay. And but within 3 weeks, and I think that's significant just because it shows how quickly my walls broke down, and I know that the trauma is responsible for that, where I became sexually active within 3 weeks of dating this young man.
Wow.
Because that's what he wanted, and my heart was so desperate for love and acceptance, and that it seemed impossible to me to say no to something that I didn't want, but so desperately didn't want to lose what it seemed like I was finally getting.
Right.
And again, in those moments,
and he was a church boy.
He was. Yeah, and that was part of the confusion for me as a young girl. And so that just led me down a path where, even though I had been living in that mess, I was serving the Lord by entering into this relationship and then becoming a sexual relationship quickly. The next several years of my life was a tumultuous time where, again, I start feeling that impact because I had the turmoil of, I still had a heart for God. And that's one of the things when I share my story that I love to point to is what I call the relentless pursuit of the Lord.
I love that.
Because it's so, when we have a heart after God, God has a heart after us. And even when we wander away, he doesn't let us go.
No, he
and
doesn't.
That's what I experienced so deeply during that time, because I still went to church because I was a good girl.
You were a leader.
I was a good girl. And I
having
was
sex
in
with
church.
your boyfriend.
On Saturday night was the boyfriend. Sunday morning I'd teach Sunday school. So I'm not proud of that. That's not to boast in it, but it was
that just like,
guilt.
Yeah.
Lots of guilt.
Yeah.
Lots of guilt.
Conflict.
Oh
my gosh.
And that took place for years. And so there'd be times as I was in 5 years. So, and in college. And so in college, having kind of entered into this worldly type of thing, my life just became more worldly, although I still considered myself a Christian, still went to church, and still had a heart to honor God, even though I knew I was not doing it. And so there'd be times I'd be in a church service and God would be calling out to me, and I would say, yes, Lord, I want more of you.
Yes.
And he would say, yes, you need to get rid of this relationship.
Yes.
And in my heart, I would say, I know, but I can't. I just can't. And so again, just pointing back to trauma, again, I was hanging on desperately to something I needed that I didn't have before. So that went on, and I kept telling God no. And that's where it comes to a point I alluded to in the last video, that God's love is so great for us and his pursuit that he will allow us to go through pain if it brings us to a better place.
Yes.
And that's what, in those moments, I didn't understand all of that. But after 5 years, and we were planning to get married, and we had a joint bank account.
Really?
You know, we were very serious and committed. And then what seemed to me to be very randomly, one day he broke up with me.
Really?
And
were you devastated?
Devastated, literally to a very deep, dark place.
Really?
Now I can speak tongue in cheek about it. At the time, it was anything but funny, but I call it the dark ages. It was about 7 or 8 months of very deep depression. I was suicidal at one point. I was angry at God. He had taken, this is my perspective then, he had taken away from me the one thing, that I felt I needed. Mm-hmm. And it was a very dark place, and I was angry. But here's God's faithfulness in that, and his pursuit is during that season, he kept bringing people into my life. And mind you, I rejected it all the time. But he put me into a job position where right next to me was this beautiful, born again, very charismatic, in your face person who just wouldn't shut up about Jesus. and I'm sitting there, we have cubicles, classic office environment. I'm in my cubicle, she's in hers, and she'd pop up her little head over my cubicle, and I'm this is very dramatic but funny. Like I'm not an artist, but I like to sketch occasionally. So I'm sketching. I wish I had one to show you. Picture an eyeball with teardrops falling out of it. These are the kinds of things I'm drawing all the time because it reflected my heart.
This is the dark place where you were.
Place. Okay. And then she'd be like, Jesus loves you, And I'm like, shut up. But she was only one of so many that God, but she spoke truth to me. And not, I make fun of it, but in those dark times, she knew I was going through a hard, and she'd speak truth. Now, I didn't receive it at that time, but God was working. He just wouldn't leave me alone.
Did you stay in church?
I did.
In a leadership position?
No, at that point, probably not.
You had stepped down from that?
Yeah, because I don't think so.
So you weren't running to God?
I was not.
You were just immersed.
I was angry at God.
Angry.
I was angry at God because he took him away,
right.
But after those 7-8 months and just that slow, I remember the night. I don't remember what finally got me to that point, but I remember the night I was at church at a service with a man who was my Sunday school teacher. I call him my spiritual father. He raised me up in the Lord at church. He went through he was a youth leader, just so many seasons of life. And I don't even remember the words that were said, but all I know is that night, the light switch went back on.
Wow.
And I knew it was time, and I recommitted my life to the Lord. When I get to look back on that, so again, in those moments, it wasn't clear to me, but when I get to look back at that, I see God's pursuit, and then I see that point that God did for me what I couldn't do for myself. Even though it was going to hurt, he knew he'd get me through.
Yes.
And he knew
had a
he'd
greater
bring me,
purpose, a greater plan.
He did. And he brought me to a better place.
Yes.
And I'm so thankful for that. And that was a very transformational time in my life. But as we reflect on my story, there's still a lot of healing to be done.
Yes.
So that was like the first outcome where I see that what I did with that young man I dated is I put him in a place in my heart where God belonged. Yes. Because I was just desperately trying to fill
and you wanted to be loved, right?
Yeah.
And affirmation, validation, all of that.
Yeah, and even though God provides all of that for us, at the time I didn't know that. I just didn't know that. And so I let a person become that to me. And so,
is this church where you grew up in church?
Yeah.
So remind me, did your family all go to church?
They did. It was, it's just one of those
and
weird
no
things.
one at church had a clue what went on behind.
Some did and some didn't.
Okay.
It wasn't, there was nothing consistent about it. There were seasons of times, yes, that my whole family went to church. But I don't remember if I shared this last time, but I even as a child, I hated that. Because it felt very hypocritical. My father was about appearances. Yes. And so literally we'd be in church and, if it's time to stand and pray, he'd make us all hold hands as if we were like one of those families that prayed together.
Yes.
And I hated it because I knew what happened in the car ride on the way to church and I knew what happened after church. Right. And I know every family has those kind of things like the screaming on the way to church, shut up before we go, we all have that. but it was darker than that.
You know, it's crazy
Yeah,
because, I shouldn't say crazy. The miracle is that you stayed in church.
I did.
And connected to God through all of that. The shame and all the deception and the life that outside of church, you stayed.
I think that's my testimony, not about that I stayed, but that God entered my life and that became the anchor. So, you picture a life, and there's so many different forms of craziness in people's lives, but it's a swirling storm that tosses things to and fro, but you have an anchor.
Yes.
And that's, the anchor doesn't stop the storm.
Right.
The anchor, it's still going on.
Yes.
But you got something to hold on to.
It's your lifeboat.
So I think that's the miracle there, that when God entered my life as a young child at 9 years old, I was given that anchor.
Yeah.
And so, I didn't let go of it. I still got tossed all around, even to the extent where I was maybe, drifting from it more than I should have, but I never let go of
Right.
anchor.
You never let go. Wow.
Yeah. So that was about 22 when all this took place with the boyfriend, and then just
all through college you dated.
Yeah, and it's right after graduation that we broke up. And, so it was, maybe a year after college when I recommitted my life to the Lord, and then just began a trajectory, towards God. There's not been another period of not that I haven't been through stuff. We've all got stuff, right?
Right.
But, right?
We all have stuff.
We've all got stuff. But I've never deviated from the trajectory of going forward.
Got it.
But in my 20s, and I think I see this generationally, that many people in their 20s are learning about themselves and figuring out who they are. But having come from a background of trauma, learning about myself and figuring out who I am was traumatic.
Right.
So that was the first time in my 20s when I couldn't even I remember having a conversation with my mom once and saying, just something's not right. This is how I described it at the time. I said, it feels like in my chest there is a pot of stuff bubbling up and boiling and spilling all over, but I have no idea what's in the pot.
You said this to your mom?
I did. Yeah.
So at what point were you having that conversation with your mom?
I don't even, we always, there were ups and downs to everything. There were times I could talk to my mom and then times I couldn't. Yeah, it was my dad was the more contentious relationship. But my mom I could talk to at times. So she recommended I go into therapy. And
really?
Because,
I felt like I needed therapy.
She was in therapy her whole life.
Oh, okay.
she was definitely one of those. Yeah.
Okay.
But I just felt turmoil and I couldn't define it. So I did go into therapy for the first time in my mid-20s and began starting to explore, wait a minute, all that happened, all that I shared with you, that affected me. I never actually thought it affected me. And even during those years of healing, I didn't realice how much it's only now in my 50s that I can, and even now, who knows if I know all of it.
Right.
But my eyes have, it's gone clearer and clearer as time goes on. So I didn't even know it affected me till I started having this weird feeling, and I, met with a counselor.
Did you feel
for a period
anger?
Of time.
This boiling up.
Isn't that crazy? No, that's very interesting in my journey. It's something it's something I still struggle with because as I've been told by different people in different contexts that I should be angry. And I don't know. I don't know about that. Yeah, that's a little deep.
Do you feel like that you have walked through forgiveness?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I do.
And so you have a peace.
I do.
Okay.
I do. I
didn't want to get sidetracked, but I just have these questions.
I hold nothing.
No animosity.
What I see in my parents were two very broken people. Very. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
But like they never should have been two people who married and produced children, except for God. God divinely.
Look where you are. Look at you today, right?
But they were just so broken. And I want to say they did the best that they could, and I guess they did, but they just they weren't equipped.
Yeah.
They weren't equipped. It's like if I told you to go outside and, dig me a ditch for a pool, but gave you nothing to use, right?
Yeah.
You can't do it. And they just didn't.
Possible.
They didn't have the tools. And apart from Christ, and healing and time, in the Lord, they weren't going to have that. So
your mom recommended therapy.
Yeah.
And so you pursued that.
I did. And it was just a first step, honestly, Deborah. It was the first time I began talking about it. First time. And that was really hard,
Yes. Was there
So
shame in that when you were talking about it? Did you feel shame?
Back then, yes. Back then. Now, no. But back then, yeah. Because it's just weird and different.
Yes.
And I still had a lot of growth there. But it was that first step of healing. And then while also doing that, pursuing God. So God had been pursuing me. But now I'm pursuing him.
Right.
And so I'm beginning to grow in my relationship with him. I'm not dating anyone. I reached out with God. God knew my heart in my, mid-20s. I wanted to be married. I wanted to be a wife and a mother. And, so God knew that. But because I was so hard in my pursuit after a relationship with him, after I had pushed him aside, I came to a place where I knew that I could say confidently to God, you know the desire of my heart, but I commit that I want you more than that.
Oh,
and if you never give me that,
I'm okay
I will
with
be
that.
content. And
that's huge.
Yeah, and it was, but you hear funny stories like this. It was shortly after that I met my husband. So, God does it that way, and it doesn't always happen that way.
Down.
Yes. But my heart was true. I wanted him, and so then I did meet my husband, and
where were you? Where in the context of your life?
I was mid-20s. Joseph and I met when I was 25.
Well, you work. You got to have a college.
Oh,
you went to work.
Oh, yeah. So
Sorry,
just to fill it all in,
that.
22, graduate from college. I studied to be a teacher.
Okay.
The first year outside of college, I did not have a teaching job, so I worked in this office with the cubicles and all of that.
Okay.
But a year after being out of college, I got my first teaching position, which was amazing, and I taught 7th and 8th grade English. I know.
That wasn't one of my strong subjects.
Yes, yeah. Oh, I love English. So, so actually, what a precious time. That was such a gift. It's what, you go to school, it's what you want to do.
Yes.
So the Lord really blessed me to have that. So, and I did that for the next 10 years. So as I'm explaining all this, I'm teaching the whole time.
So you're going through counseling and teaching.
Yes.
And when does Joseph come on the scene?
25. So this is...
And so he came while you were teaching. How did you meet him?
That's a funny story.
Well, we love stories.
Okay. So we did not have internet. And that was
back in the Stone
back
Age.
in those days, yes. And but we did have newspapers.
Okay.
And so they did. For those of you who don't know what a newspaper is,
do tell.
It's this paper product that you would open and read in your hands, and you would get black.
It would come every day,
every day, or every weekend.
Oh yeah.
So there were personal ads in the newspaper.
Oh,
so I'll try to tell it quickly because I don't want to go too far off. But I was living with my best friend at the time, and we were both 25, and we would call desperately single. It was just a funny thing. Neither of us were dating, and so Sundays we would go to church together. We'd come home, we'd get the paper, and we often read the personal ads because we thought they were funny. They often are.
Attractive, single.
Yes, yeah. And the things people say about themselves. So, we would read the personal ads and laugh and just read the paper and spend the afternoon together. So one particular Sunday, we got a little giddy and we decided to write personal ads for each other.
No.
So we did, and both of us wrote personal ads.
And you sent them in to be published?
And we sent them in to be published. So we got carried away. But hey, look at the outcome.
Yes, okay.
26 years later. So we sent them in, and it was just a whole different world because it wasn't digital. So you actually had a phone bank with a voice message, and guys would call in and leave you messages. It was all crazy. So I met a couple of guys, but Joseph was one of them.
Okay.
Now, Joseph's funny story is he never saw the ad because he wouldn't be reading the personal ads. Only losers did that. And that's what he would say.
He would say that.
Actually, if Joseph was telling this story, he would say, oh, she advertised stud wanted. And I responded. That's his story.
That is priceless.
That's what
I
he
need
says.
to meet Joseph.
So, but he never saw the ad. A friend of his saw the ad and said, "Oh my gosh, Joe, this girl is just like you in female form." The way I described myself, I said I was a born-again Christian looking for, a long-term relationship. I was a teacher. Just different descriptors were all him. He was a teacher. He was a born-again Christian and 25.
So now they call that Christian mingle.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Okay.
So he ends up calling the ad. We end up talking on the phone for about 2 weeks. We decide to meet.
Okay.
We have our first date.
In those days, you don't put pictures.
No, you've never
So you
seen
have no
each other at
idea
all.
what he looks like. He didn't know what you
Isn't
look
it? Yeah,
like.
it was very different.
Okay,
Very different.
go ahead.
So
So you
literally, we meet in this town because you haven't met each other. You don't drive together.
Right.
You meet. There's rules. So we meet at a little place called Classy Coffee in Huntington on Long Island. And it's all like, I'll be wearing this because you have to find them, It's like, I'll have the rose in my hair, which I do not do that.
Rose in my hair. Okay.
So we meet at Classy Coffee. We have our first date. And the outcome of that date was, he's nice. She's nice.
Okay.
But, no sparks. Honestly,
No sparks.
Super nice guy. Reminded me of my brother-in-law a little bit, but I thought we didn't have enough in common.
Wow.
Like, we enjoyed our time together, but everything we kept talking about, I'd say, "Oh, what about this?" He's like, "No." And he'd say, "What about this?" I'm like, "No." So there was just nothing flying. And by the end of the night...
This is a dead end.
Not exactly. So this is what happens at the end of the night that changes it. Yeah, I wasn't sure where we'd go from here, but he used to go to a really big church. I went to a really small church. He said he was looking for a smaller church. We had a great 20s and 30s group at the time. And he said, "Would you feel weird if I came to your church? I'm just looking for a place to connect." And I was like, "Well, I don't care. He's a nice guy."
Yeah.
So he came. He started coming to my church. So here's the fun part of the story is we did not have another date. Because we really didn't have any sparks. But he joined my group, and he assimilated into my group of friends. That's it. He became part of our 20s, 30s group. He became faithful in our church. People would say to me, "You and Joe should date." I'm like, "Nah, he played hockey in college." So I would be like, "Oh, he's a hockey head. I don't want anything to do with him." So this went on for a year. A year. And
you guys
no romantic relationship at all.
You would engage. And
we were friends. We were good friends. Yep.
Well, that was important.
Spent a lot of time together, especially. So now this is where it starts happening in the summer. We were both teachers. Neither of us are working. We spend a lot of time together, but not romantically. Just hanging out, doing things because we're both teachers. We have nothing to do. So, but I still wouldn't have said any romantic feelings about him. But if he didn't call, I'd be like, why didn't Joe call? One of those weird things. And then here's my favorite part. Okay, I'm trying to hurry up.
No, you're good.
So by September of that next year, so a year later, I wrote a story about this called Ask Me in a Year From Now. A year later, Joe's out with a friend of his. He gets into a car accident. I'm out with a bunch of girlfriends or at one of my girlfriends' house watching TV, and we talk every night by this point.
You and Joe are talking every night.
A friend,
but you're just friends.
Just friends. Oh yeah.
every
Nothing romantic
okay.
every night. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm watching a TV show with my girlfriends. He has a car accident. He's okay, but his friend ran a red light and he got a cut in his leg, had to go to the hospital. And so he calls me. He's like, "Rebecca, I had a car accident today." And genuinely, "Oh my gosh, are you okay?" "Oh yeah, I'm fine. I got a couple of stitches." And I'm like, "You sure you're okay?" "Yes, I'm fine." "Oh good, I'm watching a TV show. I'll talk to you later." So, and I hang up on him. Now, what I didn't know is that when Joseph had the car accident, here's the dramatic moment, like if we're doing the movie, the music is going to swell. Literally, this is what he says. Like, his friend runs the red light. He sees a car coming at him. And honestly, when you're in those situations, your life flashes before your eyes because, like, you don't know what's going to happen. He said in that moment, as the car is coming, he said, he said bad words in his head. And then he said, "I could die and I haven't told Rebecca I love her."
Oh my God.
And that's the first time he ever thought it. It just came in that moment.
Oh,
so
wow.
I'm getting little chills. It's my favorite story. It's my favorite story. So when he called me, that was to tell me this. But I'm like, watching a TV show. Talk to you later. So, but I didn't know.
No, you didn't
And
know.
he said he was okay.
You can't be responsible.
No. So we did talk that night because after hanging out with my girlfriends, I went home, I called him. So he unloads this whole thing.
He tells you.
Tells me, I love you.
Over the phone.
Over the phone. And it's a whole When Harry Met Sally thing. I don't know if you know the reference, when at the very end by the New Year's Eve party, when he tells her everything he loves about her. That's what Joe does. He's like, I love this and I love that and I love, and I'm like, you know, because I hadn't come to this place yet. So he's just blowing me away, you know. And my first response to him, the poor guy, he goes,
what do you think?
He says, what would you say if I said I wanted to have a relationship with you? And I said, why would you go and do something like that for? Because he's going to ruin our friendship. You're going to mess it up. Yes. So I don't even remember.
Did you really say that?
Oh, absolutely.
Why would you go and do?
Yes.
That was not an inner monologue.
No,
you actually
it came out of my
verbalized.
mouth. Yes.
And his response was?
I don't even, that's when he started telling me all that he loved about me because he wanted to have a relationship with me. And I'm like, I don't even remember all that was said the rest of the night, but we ended the call. Nothing came of that, but I'm crying now because I'm like, what do I do? He's like a best friend to me.
I don't want to lose that.
And so we decided that the next day we would get together and have dinner. So this is date number 2, a year later. That's how I like to put it.
Okay.
We go out for dinner, go to the hospital, visit a friend who had a baby, and that night, this is not inappropriate the way it sounds, he came back to my apartment.
Oh no, we're good. We're good. Anything you want to tell?
Yeah, nothing. I had changed my ways by then, and we talked till about 1 a.m. And in that time, I just realized that I loved him too. I just didn't know it, and so we're standing there by the door because it's late at night, waiting for him to leave, and we confess our love for each other and something about dating. And I said, Joe, why would we date if you love me and I love you and we know we want to spend our lives together? Why would we bother dating? Why not just get married? And he said, yeah, let's do it.
So you kind of proposed.
Sort of. And then he asked me if he could give me my first kiss. Gave me a little kiss and left, and we were engaged, got married 9 months later, and we're married for 26 years.
That is a beautiful thing.
I love my story. It's a gift from the Lord.
So not to trudge up the past.
No, please.
But during that time of being a friend for the year, did he know anything about your home life or what you had experienced?
Little by little.
Now, were you still in counseling through all of that time?
No, but actually, it was around the time I met Joe that I was finishing up counseling.
And you felt good about finishing?
I felt like I had learned what I could at that time.
Yeah.
I've learned a lot over the years that I mentioned my mother was in counseling her whole life. I don't see that as healthy because if you never move on from what you're learning, so I learned what I needed to for that season. It wasn't the most profound, but it was the first step, and a first step has to be taken to get to a next step.
Yes.
By this time in my life, I've been in counseling 3 times.
Okay.
And so,
as of today, basically.
Yes, right. So that was step 1, and so it was very significant, but not extreme growth through it. But it was the first step.
So in entering a relationship with him in marriage,
that's where a lot more comes out.
Yes.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
So
anyone who's ever been married knows that,
And so we've done 30 minutes.
We have. Okay.
So maybe can we
forward, or?
No, can we stop and pick this up?
Sure.
For next week?
Absolutely.
Oh,
Absolutely.
wow. This is so good. So there's there's more to tell.
Yes.
I mean, what a great story. I love it.
I thank God for it.
Yes. Thank you guys for joining us. Yes. And we hope to see you next time. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
I'm excited to hear the end. Well, where we are as of today.
Yes. We're not.
Bless you guys. Have a great day. Thank you.